The clock on the wall showed 11:30 p.m. as Maya quietly pushed her cleaning cart through the empty hallways of the grand concert hall. Her soft footsteps echoed in the silence, a sound she had grown used to over the past 3 years. While most people were at home watching late-night TV or scrolling through their phones, Maya was here, making sure every corner of this beautiful place sparkled for tomorrow's audience. Maya was 34 years old, though she looked younger. Her hair was always tied back in a simple ponytail, and she wore the same navy blue uniform every night. To anyone who saw her, she was just another cleaner doing her job. But Maya carried secrets that no one in this fancy building could ever imagine. The Riverside Concert Hall was one of the most famous music venues in the city. Rich people came here wearing expensive clothes and jewelry. They sipped champagne during intermission and talked about art and culture. Maya had cleaned up after hundreds of these events, picking up their empty glasses and wiping down their seats. She was invisible to them, just part of the background. But Maya loved being here, even if nobody knew it. Every night after the last person left and the lights dimmed, she would take her time cleaning the main auditorium. This was her favorite part of the job. The huge room with its red velvet seats and golden decorations felt magical even when it was empty. Sometimes she could still hear the music echoing from earlier performances, as if the walls themselves remembered every note. Tonight was like any other night. Maya started in the lobby, emptying trash cans and mopping the marble floors until they gleamed. She cleaned the bathrooms, restocked the paper towels, and wiped down every mirror until there wasn't a single smudge. Then she moved to the smaller practice rooms where musicians warmed up before shows. These rooms always smelled like rosin. An old wood, a smell that made Maya's heart ache in ways she couldn't explain. As she worked, Maya thought about her day job at the local diner. She served coffee and pie to truck drivers and office workers from 6 in the morning until 2 in the afternoon. Then she went home to her tiny apartment, tried to get some sleep, and came here for the night shift. It wasn't an easy life, but it paid the bills. Barely. Maya had been working 2 jobs for so long that she couldn't remember what it felt like to be rested. Her hands were rough from all the cleaning chemicals and her back ached from bending over tables and mopping floors. But she never complained. She had learned long ago that complaining didn't change anything. Finally, it was time to clean the main auditorium. This was always the last stop of her night. Maya pushed open the heavy doors and stepped into the vast space. Even in the dim emergency lighting, the room was breathtaking. The stage looked huge from back here, and the grand piano sat in the center like a sleeping giant. Maya had a routine. She started at the top of the auditorium and worked her way down, row by row. She picked up programs that people had dropped, cleaned cup holders, and made sure every seat was perfect for tomorrow's audience. As she worked, she let her mind wander. She thought about the concert that had happened earlier that evening. It was a classical music performance, and even from the hallway where she had been working, she could hear pieces of the music, a violin. Concerto, she thought, maybe Vivaldi. Maya knew these things, though she had never told anyone at work. How could she explain that she recognized composers and pieces? How could she tell them that music wasn't just background noise to her? The truth was, Maya had grown up with music. Her childhood home had been filled with it. Her mother hummed while cooking dinner. Her father whistled old songs while reading the newspaper. And Maya herself had spent hours every day practicing piano. Hours and hours, until her fingers knew the keys better than they knew anything else in the world. She had been good at it too. Really good. Good enough that her piano teacher, Mrs. Rodriguez, had talked about conservatories and scholarships. Good enough that she had won competitions and performed at recitals where proud parents took pictures and clapped until their hands hurt. Maya had dreamed of playing on stages like this one, wearing a beautiful dress and making music that would move people to tears. But life had other plans. When Maya was 16, everything fell apart. Her father lost his job at the factory when the company moved overseas. Her mother got sick and couldn't work anymore. The medical bills piled up like snow in winter, higher and higher until they blocked out everything else. The family piano, a beautiful upright that had belonged to Maya's grandmother, was the first thing to go, then the car. Then they lost the house. Maya remembered the day they sold the piano. A man with a truck came to take it away. As he and his helper carried it out the front door, Maya felt like they were taking part of her soul with them. She had touched those keys every day for as long as she could remember. Now they were gone forever. After that, there was no money for piano lessons, no time for practice. Maya got a job at a grocery store after school to help pay for groceries and rent on the small apartment they moved to. Music became a luxury they couldn't afford, like eating out or buying new clothes. Maya told herself it was okay, family came first. Dreams could wait, but waiting turned into years. High school ended and Maya got a full-time job instead of going to college. Her mother's health got worse, requiring more expensive treatments. Her father found work again, but it didn't pay as much as his old job. Maya kept working, kept helping, kept putting her own dreams on hold. Now, 18 years later, Maya was still waiting. Her parents were doing better. Her mother's health had stabilized, and her father had gotten a promotion. They had told Maya many times that she should think about herself now, maybe go back to school or pursue music again. But Maya was scared. 18 years was a long time. What if she had forgotten everything? What if her fingers didn't remember? What if she had never been as good as she thought she was back then? So she kept cleaning. She kept working her 2 jobs and paying her bills and living her quiet life. But every night, when she was alone in this beautiful auditorium, she couldn't help but look at that piano on the stage. Sometimes she wondered what it would feel like to sit at that bench again, to feel the smooth keys under her fingers, to make music instead of just cleaning up after it. Maya finished the last row of seats and gathered her supplies. It was almost 1 in the morning and she was tired. Tomorrow she would be back at the diner at 6, serving coffee and smiling at customers. Tomorrow night she would be back here, cleaning and dreaming, and remembering what it felt like to be someone different. As she turned to leave, Maya took one last look at the piano on the stage. In the dim light, it almost seemed to be waiting for something, or someone. 3 weeks later, Maya's routine was about to be shattered in ways she never could have imagined. It was a Thursday evening, and instead of the usual concert crowd, the Riverside Concert Hall was hosting something different, a private charity gala for the city's wealthiest donors, complete with a special musical performance that was supposed to raise money for underprivileged children's music programs. Maya arrived for her shift at the usual time, but tonight felt different from the moment she walked through the staff entrance. The building buzzed with activity even though the official event had ended hours ago. Catering staff rushed around cleaning up champagne glasses and fancy appetizer plates. Security guards stood at their post, looking more alert than usual. Maya learned from her supervisor that some VIP guests were staying late for a private after-party and musical demonstration. As Maya began her cleaning routine, she could hear voices and laughter coming from the main auditorium. This was unusual. Normally, by the time she started her shift, the building was empty except for other cleaning staff and maybe a security guard or 2. Tonight, though, at least 20 people were still inside, and from the sound of their conversations, they had been drinking expensive wine all evening. Maya tried to stay focused on her work. She cleaned the lobby bathrooms, emptied trash cans, and restocked supplies. But as she moved closer to the main auditorium, she couldn't help but hear what was happening inside. Someone was playing piano, and they were good, really good. The music floated through the heavy doors like perfume, beautiful and intoxicating. Maya recognized the piece immediately. Chopin's Ballade No. 1 in G minor. She had played this same piece when she was 15 for a regional competition that she had won. The memory hit her like a wave, bringing back the feeling of sitting at a piano bench, her fingers dancing across the keys while an audience listened in complete silence. Despite herself, Maya found her feet slowing down as she mopped the hallway. Outside the auditorium, the pianist inside was technically perfect, but something about the performance felt cold to her. It was all skill and no heart, like someone showing off their expensive watch instead of actually caring about the time. Maya knew she shouldn't be listening. She should finish her work and move on to the next area. But the music drew her in like a magnet. She had been hungry for live music for so long, surviving on whatever she could catch from performances during her work. This was the closest she had been to a piano performance in years. When the piece ended, Maya heard enthusiastic applause and voices calling out compliments. Then she heard a voice that made her stomach turn. It was smooth and confident, the kind of voice that belonged to someone who had never doubted their place in the world. Thank you, the voice said. You know, that piece is considered one of the most challenging in the classical repertoire. Not many pianists can handle the technical demands while maintaining the emotional depth that Chopin intended. Maya rolled her eyes as she continued mopping. She could hear the smugness in his voice from out here in the hallway. This was clearly someone who loved the sound of his own voice almost as much as he loved the sound of his own playing. Now, the voice continued, I know you've all been very generous tonight with your donations to help underprivileged children access music education. It's so important to give these children opportunities they would never have otherwise. Music can truly transform lives, especially for those who come from less fortunate circumstances. Maya's grip tightened on her mop handle. Something about the way he said less fortunate circumstances made her skin crawl. It sounded condescending, like he was talking about stray animals instead of human beings. She should have kept walking. Should have minded her own business and continued with her cleaning routine. But curiosity got the better of her. Maya had always been too curious for her own good, even as a child. Quietly, she moved closer to the auditorium doors, which were slightly open to let in some air. Through the crack, she could see inside. About 20 well-dressed people sat scattered throughout the first few rows of seats, wine glasses in hand, looking relaxed and entertained. On the stage sat the grand piano, and next to it stood a man in an expensive tuxedo. He was probably in his early 40s, with perfectly styled hair and the kind of confident posture that came from years of being told how talented he was. The man gestured grandly toward the audience as he spoke. You know, I've been playing professionally for over 20 years now. I've performed at Carnegie Hall, Lincoln Center, with orchestras around the world. And I can tell you that real musical talent is quite rare. It takes years of expensive training, the best teachers, countless hours of practice in proper facilities. Maya felt her cheeks burning. She knew exactly what he was getting at. Music was for people like him, people with money and connections and opportunities, people who could afford the best of everything. Not for people like her who cleaned their messes and stayed invisible in the background. It's not something you can just pick up, he continued, walking around the piano like he owned it. These instruments require a delicate touch, years of study, and understanding of classical tradition that comes from proper education. One woman in the audience laughed and raised her wine glass. Oh, David, you make it sound so exclusive. Surely some people are just naturally musical? David smiled, the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Well, Margaret, natural ability only gets you so far. Without proper training and guidance, raw talent is essentially useless. It's like having a sports car but not knowing how to drive. Maya was about to turn away when David's eyes suddenly locked onto hers through the crack in the door. Her heart jumped into her throat. She had been caught eavesdropping, and now this arrogant man was staring right at her. Oh, look, David said, his voice taking on an amused tone. We have an audience member we didn't know about. The entire group turned to look toward the doors. Maya wanted to disappear into the floor. She considered running, but her feet felt frozen to the spot. Come in, David called out, gesturing for her to enter. Don't be shy. We're all friends here. Maya slowly pushed the door open and stepped inside, still holding her mop. She felt every pair of eyes in the room studying her uniform, her simple ponytail, her rough hands. She was painfully aware that she didn't belong in this space, not as anything other than the help. I'm sorry, Maya said quietly. I was just cleaning the hallway. I didn't mean to interrupt. No interruption at all, David said, though his smile suggested otherwise. In fact, this is perfect timing. We were just discussing how music requires years of training and proper education. The way he emphasized the words made Maya's face burn with embarrassment. She could see some of the audience members exchanging glances. Clearly amused by this unexpected entertainment, David walked closer to her, his expensive shoes clicking on the stage floor. "Tell me, do you enjoy music?" "Yes," Maya answered simply, not trusting herself to say more. "How wonderful," David said, his tone dripping with fake enthusiasm. "And I suppose you think anyone can just sit down at a piano and play beautiful music?" Maya felt the trap closing around her. She could see where this was going, and every instinct told her to excuse herself and leave. But something in his condescending tone sparked a flame of anger in her chest. This was exactly the kind of attitude that had convinced her she didn't belong in the music world. This was why she had given up her dreams so easily all those years ago. "I think," Maya said carefully, "that music comes from the heart, not from how much money you spend on lessons." A few people in the audience chuckled, clearly entertained by this unexpected debate between the famous pianist and the cleaning lady. David's smile grew wider, like a cat that had cornered a mouse. How charming, how absolutely charming. He gestured grandly toward the piano. "Well then, since you believe it's all about heart and not training, why don't you show us what you can do?" The room fell silent. Maya could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears. Every person in that audience was waiting to see her humiliate herself. They wanted to watch her fumble around on the keys and prove David's point about the importance of proper training and education. "I'm working," Maya said, hoping to escape the situation. "Oh, come now," David pressed. "Surely you can spare a minute to share your heartfelt music with us? I'm sure everyone here would love to hear what untrained, natural talent sounds like." Maya stood there, holding her mop, feeling smaller than she had ever felt in her life. She was trapped and everyone in the room knew it. Maya stood frozen in that moment, feeling like the entire world was watching her. The fancy chandelier above cast shadows across her face, and she could smell the lingering scent of expensive perfume and wine in the air. Her cleaning uniform suddenly felt heavier, like it was weighing her down and reminding everyone exactly what she was supposed to be doing here. David stood near the piano with that smug smile still plastered on his face. He was clearly enjoying this moment, probably thinking he was about to teach everyone a valuable lesson about knowing your place in the world. The audience members sat forward in their seats, some of them already pulling out their phones. Maya realized with horror that they were getting ready to record whatever embarrassing thing was about to happen. "I really should get back to work," Maya said again, her voice barely above a whisper. She gripped her mop handle so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "My supervisor will be looking for me." "Oh, nonsense," said the woman David had called. Margaret. She was wearing a diamond necklace that probably cost more than Maya made in a year. "This will only take a minute. We're all very curious to hear what you can do." Another man in the audience chimed in, "Yes, please. David has been telling us all evening about the importance of proper training. It would be fascinating to hear." The difference. Maya felt her cheeks burning red. These people weren't being cruel on purpose, but they clearly saw her as entertainment, like she was a circus act they had stumbled upon. They had no idea that their curiosity was crushing her. Spirit with every passing second, David walked closer to the edge of the stage, his expensive shoes clicking on the polished floor. "Look, I'm not trying to embarrass you," he said, though his tone suggested otherwise. "I'm simply trying to demonstrate something important to my friends here. Music is an art form that requires dedication, study, and proper guidance. It's not something you can just figure out on your own. Some of the greatest musicians in history were self-taught," Maya said quietly, surprising herself with her own boldness. David laughed, a sound that made Maya's skin crawl. You've heard that myth too, have you? Let me guess, you think someone like Ray Charles or Stevie Wonder just magically knew how to play? They had teachers, my dear. They had guidance. They had access to proper instruments and education, even if their stories have been romanticized over the years. Maya felt something stirring inside her chest. It was anger, but it was also something else. Something she hadn't felt in a very long time. It was the same feeling she used to get right before a piano competition, when nervous energies mixed with determination and created something powerful. Besides, David continued, even if someone had some natural ability, 18 years away from an instrument would be more than enough to lose whatever skills they might have had. Maya's head snapped up. How did he know it had been 18 years? She hadn't said anything about her past. Then she realized he wasn't talking about her specifically. He was just making a general point about how musical skills deteriorate without practice. But the coincidence hit her like a punch to the stomach. One of the audience members, a younger man with thick glasses, called out, "Come on, David, give her a chance." "What's the worst that could happen?" "Yeah," said another woman. "It could be fun. Maybe she surprised us all." Maya looked around the room at all these faces staring at her expectantly. Some looked genuinely curious, others seemed amused, and a few appeared bored, like they were waiting for this little sideshow to end so they could get back to their wine and conversations. But it was David's face that really got to her. He looked so certain, so absolutely convinced that he was about to prove his point. He probably saw dozens of people like Maya every day, service workers, waitresses, janitors, and he had never once wondered if any of them might have dreams or talents. Hidden beneath their uniforms, Maya thought about all the times she had walked past this piano over the past 3 years. All the nights she had looked at it and wondered what it would feel like to play again. All the moments she had stood in this exact spot, cleaning and dreaming and remembering what it felt like to make music instead of just listening to it. She thought about her teenage self, sitting at competitions with butterflies in her stomach but fire in her heart. She remembered the feeling of her fingers finding exactly the right keys, of making music that moved people to tears. She remembered believing that music was her destiny, her purpose, her gift to the world. "You know what?" Maya said, her voice suddenly stronger than it had been all evening. "Okay." The word hung in the air for a moment. David's eyebrows shot up in surprise. He clearly hadn't expected her to actually accept his challenge. "Okay," he repeated. "I'll try," Maya said, setting her mop aside and taking a step toward the stage. "But I want to make something clear first." The room fell completely silent. Even the people who had been whispering to each other stopped talking. Maya walked slowly toward the stage steps, her heart pounding so hard she was sure everyone could hear it. "I'm not doing this to prove anything to you," she said, looking directly at David, "and I'm not doing it to entertain anyone. I'm doing it because that piano has been calling to me for 3 years, and I'm tired of pretending I don't hear it." She climbed the steps to the stage, her soft-soled work shoes silent. On the wood, the stage lights were brighter than she had expected, and she had to blink a few times to adjust her eyes. From up here, the audience looked different. Smaller somehow, and less intimidating. David stepped aside, gesturing toward the piano bench. With an exaggerated bow, "By all means," he said. "The stage is yours." Maya approached the beautiful grand piano slowly, like she was approaching a wild animal that might run away if she moved too quickly. The instrument was even more magnificent. Up close, the black surface was so perfectly polished that she could see her reflection in it. The keys seemed to glow under the stage lights, white and black in perfect alternating order, just waiting for someone to bring them to life. She sat down on the bench and immediately had to adjust the height. David was taller than her, and the bench was set too high. As she fumbled with the mechanism, she heard a few chuckles from the audience. Her face burned with embarrassment again, but she forced herself to focus on getting the bench to the right position when she finally settled. Onto the bench at the proper height, Maya placed her hands in her lap and stared down at the keys. They looked exactly like the keys on her grandmother's piano, the one they had sold all those years ago. For a moment, she was 16 again, saying goodbye to the instrument that had been her best friend for so many years. "Take your time, David," Saad, his voice dripping with fake patience. "I know it can be overwhelming for someone who isn't used to performing." Maya closed her eyes and took a deep breath. She could smell the wood of the piano, mixed with the faint scent of rosin and old sheet music. It was a smell that took her right back to her childhood, to hours of practice and recitals and competitions and pure joy. When she opened her eyes, something had changed. The nervous energy was still there, but it had transformed into something else, something that felt like coming home after a very long journey. Maya lifted her hands and placed them gently on the keys. The ivory was cool and smooth under her fingertips, exactly like she remembered. For just a moment, she let herself feel the weight of 18 years of silence. 18 years of wondering what might have been. 18 years of cleaning up after other people's dreams while her own gathered dust in the back of her heart. Then, very quietly, she began to play. The first notes were tentative, like she was having a conversation with an old friend she hadn't seen in years. Her fingers moved slowly across the keys, testing, remembering, finding their way back to movements that had once been as natural as breathing, and then something magical happened. Her hands remembered everything. The first notes that came from the piano were soft and hesitant, like a whispered question floating through the air. Maya's fingers moved carefully across the keys, testing each one as if she was greeting old friends she hadn't seen in years. The sound was pure and clear, cutting through the silence of the auditorium like sunlight breaking through clouds. In the audience, people shifted in their seats. They had been expecting something clumsy, maybe a simple melody played with one finger. Instead, they were hearing something entirely different. Even those first careful notes had a quality that made everyone lean forward and pay attention. Maya closed her eyes and let her hands find their way across the keyboard. 18 years melted away in an instant, and suddenly she was 15 again, sitting in her childhood living room with her grandmother's piano. The muscle memory was still there, buried deep but not forgotten. Her fingers began to move with more confidence, finding familiar patterns and chord progressions. She started with something simple, a piece by Bach that she had learned when she was 12. It was one of the inventions, a two-part melody that seemed to have a conversation between her left and right hands. As she played, Maya felt something inside her chest loosening, like a knot that had been tied too tightly for too long was finally coming undone. The audience was completely silent. Now, even David had stopped moving, his confident smirk frozen on his face as he realized that what he was hearing wasn't what he had expected at all. This wasn't a fumbling amateur making noise on an expensive instrument. This was real music played by someone who clearly understood what they were doing. Maya transitioned smoothly into another piece, this one by Mozart. Her touch became lighter, more playful as the familiar melody danced under her fingers. She had performed this piece at a competition when she was 14 and had won first place. The memory came flooding back, standing on that small stage in her best dress, feeling proud and nervous and completely alive as the music poured out of her as she played. Something extraordinary began to happen. All the years of sadness and regret and lost dreams seemed to flow through her fingers and into the music. This wasn't just a technical performance anymore. This was Maya telling her story, sharing 18 years of silence and longing and heartbreak through the only language that had ever truly made sense to her, the woman named. Margaret sat with her wineglass forgotten in her hand, tears beginning to form in her eyes. She had attended hundreds of classical concerts over the years, had heard some of the world's most famous pianists perform. But there was something different about this. Something raw and honest that she had never experienced before. Maya's playing grew stronger and more confident with each passing moment. Her hands moved across the keys with increasing fluidity, like water flowing downhill, finding the path of least resistance. She played a piece by Chopin next, one of the nocturnes that had always been her favorite. The melody was hauntingly beautiful, full of longing and hope, and the kind of deep emotion that can only come from someone who has truly lived. In the audience, phones that had been raised to record Maya's expected failure were slowly lowered. This wasn't something to mock or share as a joke on social media. This was something precious, something that demanded respect and attention. Several people found themselves holding their breath, Afraid that any sound might break the spell that Maya was weaving. David stood frozen at the side of the stage, his face pale and his mouth slightly open. He was a professional musician himself, and he recognized virtuosity when he heard it. But this was more than just technical skill. This was artistry of the highest level, performed by someone wearing a janitor's uniform, who had just picked up a mop 20 minutes ago. Maya's playing continued to evolve as she moved through different pieces. She played Debussy, and the music shimmered like light on water. She played Beethoven, and the notes rang out with power and determination. She played music that spoke of joy and sorrow, of dreams lost and dreams found, of the incredible resilience of the human spirit. As she played, Maya felt herself transforming. The woman who had walked onto the stage clutching a mop and feeling ashamed of her uniform was disappearing. In her place sat someone else entirely, a musician, an artist, a person whose hands held the power to move hearts and change lives. This was who she had always been. Underneath the years of silence and the weight of practical responsibilities, the young man with glasses wiped tears from his cheeks, not caring who might see him crying. He had come here tonight expecting to write a check and shake some hands and maybe enjoy some decent wine. He hadn't expected to witness something that would stay with him for the rest of his life. Maya began to play something different now. Something that wasn't from any composer or sheet music. She was improvising, creating music in real time that came straight from her heart. The melody started simple and grew more complex, weaving together themes from all the pieces she had just played. It was like she was telling the story of her entire musical journey, the childhood joy, the teenage ambition, the devastating loss, the years of silence, and now this moment of rediscovery. Her left hand provided a steady, gentle rhythm while her right hand soared above it, creating melodies that seemed to float in the air like birds. The music spoke of loneliness and hope, of dreams deferred but not destroyed, of the way music can heal wounds that nothing else can touch. David found himself sinking into a nearby chair, his legs suddenly too weak to support him. He was watching. His entire worldview crumbled before his eyes. Everything he had said about proper training and education and the importance of having the right background suddenly seemed small and petty. Here was someone who had learned to play in a modest home with a modest piano and modest means, and she was making music that put his technically perfect but emotionally hollow performances to shame. The improvisation grew more intense, more passionate. Maya's whole body swayed with the music as her hands danced across the keys. She wasn't performing anymore. She was living, breathing, existing in a space where only music mattered. This was what she had been born to do, what she had been denied for 18 long years. In the audience, people were openly weeping. Margaret reached for her husband's hand and squeezed it tightly, not trusting herself to speak. The young man with glasses pulled out his phone again, but this time it wasn't to record Maya's failure. He wanted to capture this moment of pure beauty, this reminder that extraordinary things could happen in the most unexpected places. As the improvisation reached its climax, Maya played with such intensity and emotion that it felt like the piano itself was singing. Every note was perfect, but more than that, every note had meaning. This wasn't just music. This was a human soul expressing itself in the only way it knew how. The piece ended with a series of soft, gentle notes that faded into silence like the last rays of sunset. Maya sat perfectly still for a moment, her hands resting on the keys, her eyes still closed. The silence that followed was profound and sacred, the kind of silence that only comes after something truly magnificent has happened. When Maya finally opened her eyes and looked out at the audience, she saw faces transformed by what they had just experienced. These weren't the same people who had been laughing and drinking wine and treating her like entertainment just minutes ago. These were people who had been touched by something real and beautiful and utterly unexpected. The silence stretched on, nobody wanting to be the first to break it with applause. Maya sat at the piano bench, suddenly aware again of her uniform, her simple ponytail, her rough hands. But something fundamental had changed. She had remembered who she was. The silence stretched on for what felt like forever. Maya sat at the piano bench, her hands still resting gently on the keys, unsure of what would happen next. She could feel 20 pairs of eyes staring at her, but she couldn't bring herself to look up and face them. The magic of the music was still flowing through her veins, and she was afraid that meeting their gaze might break the spell completely. Then, slowly, one person began to clap. It was Margaret, the woman with the diamond necklace who had seemed so amused by the whole situation just minutes earlier. Her applause started soft and hesitant but grew stronger and more insistent. Soon the man sitting next to her joined in. Then the young man with glasses. Then another person and another. Within seconds, the entire audience was on their feet, clapping with an enthusiasm that filled the whole auditorium. The sound echoed off the walls and ceiling, creating a thunderous roar that seemed to go on forever. Some people were still crying, wiping tears from their cheeks while they applauded. Others were shaking their heads in amazement, like they couldn't believe what they had just witnessed. Maya finally looked up, and the expression on her face was one of complete shock. She had expected polite applause at best, maybe even silence or awkward coughing. She certainly hadn't expected this overwhelming response from people who had been treating her like entertainment just half an hour ago, but it was David's face that really caught her attention. The arrogant pianist was still sitting in the chair, where he had collapsed during her performance, and he looked like he had seen a ghost. His usual confident smirk was completely gone, replaced by something that looked almost like fear. For the first time in his professional career, David had come face to face with someone whose musical ability made his own seem ordinary by comparison. As the applause continued, Maya noticed a woman in the audience who was doing something different from everyone else. While the others were clapping and cheering, this woman was furiously typing on her phone, her fingers flying across the screen with urgent intensity. She was probably in her 50s, with short gray hair and the kind of focused expression that suggested she was used to taking charge of situations. The woman finished typing and immediately stood up, pushing past the people in her row to get to the aisle. She practically ran toward the stage, her high heels clicking loudly on the auditorium floor. Maya watched nervously as this stranger approached, wondering if she was about to be told off for using the piano without permission. "Excuse me," the woman called out as she reached the edge of the stage. "Excuse me, could you please come down here for a moment?" Maya looked around uncertainly. The applause was finally dying down, and everyone seemed to be waiting to see what would happen next. She slowly stood up from the piano bench and walked to the stage steps, her legs feeling shaky and unsteady. "I'm sorry," Maya said as she reached the woman. "I know I probably shouldn't have played the piano. I can pay for any damage or tuning it might need." "No, no, no," the woman interrupted, her eyes bright with excitement. "You don't understand. I'm Elena Vasquez. I'm the classical music critic for the City Tribune, and I've been covering concerts and performances for over 20 years. Maya felt her stomach drop. A music critic, someone whose job it was to judge and evaluate musical performances. Someone who probably knew immediately that Maya was just a cleaning lady pretending to be something she wasn't. "I need to know everything about you," Elena continued, pulling out a small recording device. "Your name, your background, your training. What I just heard was absolutely extraordinary, and I have to write about it." "There's really nothing to write about," Maya said quietly, feeling embarrassed again. "I'm just I work here. I clean the building." "Just clean the building?" Elena repeated, her voice rising with disbelief. "Did you hear what you just played? Do you have any idea how remarkable that was?" By now, other people from the audience had gathered around them. Margaret was there, still dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. The young man with glasses stood nearby, looking at Maya like she was some kind of miracle. Even David had finally gotten up from his chair and was hovering at the edge of the group, though he looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. "Please," Elena said, "just tell me your name." "Maya," she answered reluctantly. "Maya Rodriguez." "Maya Rodriguez," Elena repeated, like she was testing how the name would look in a newspaper headline. "And where did you study piano?" Maya felt her cheeks burning again. "I didn't study anywhere, really. I took lessons when I was a kid, but that was a long time ago." How long ago? Elena pressed. I stopped playing when I was 16, Maya admitted. That was 18 years ago. A gasp went up from the small crowd that had gathered. Elena's eyes went wide with amazement. 18 years? Margaret exclaimed. You haven't played piano for 18 years and you just performed like that? Maya nodded, feeling more uncomfortable by the minute. She wasn't used to this kind of attention, and all these questions were making her want to retreat back into the shadows where she belonged. But that's impossible, said the young man with glasses. I mean, muscle memory is one thing, but what you just did, that was artistry. That was interpretation at the highest level. You can't just pick that up again after 18 years. Why did you stop? Elena asked gently, sensing that this was the heart of the story. Maya looked around at all the expectant faces surrounding her. These people were waiting for her to explain herself, to justify her existence in their world. But how could she tell them about her father losing his job, about her mother's medical bills, about selling the family piano to buy groceries? How could she explain to people who wore $1,000 watches and diamond necklaces what it felt like to give up your dreams because your family needed help paying rent? My family needed money, Maya said simply. We had to sell our piano and I had to get a job. The silence that followed was different from the awed silence after her performance. This was the silence of people who were suddenly confronted with a reality they had never had to face. Most of the people in this room had never had to choose between their dreams and their family's survival. They had never had to sell something precious just to keep the lights on. Elena was the first to speak. And you've been working as a custodian here for how long? 3 years, Maya answered. 3 years, Elena repeated, shaking her head in amazement. You've been cleaning this building for 3 years, walking past this piano every night, and nobody knew you could play like this. Maya shrugged. Nobody ever asked. David finally stepped forward, looking pale and shaken. I owe you an apology, he said quietly. What I said earlier, the way I treated you, it was completely inappropriate. Maya looked at him, this man who had tried to humiliate her just an hour ago. She could see genuine remorse in his eyes, and she realized that her playing had affected him just as much as it had affected everyone else. You were just making a point, Maya said. And you weren't completely wrong. Training and education are important. No, David insisted. I was showing off and I was being cruel. What you just did, it reminded me why I fell in love with music. In the first place, Elena was still typing frantically on her phone, pausing occasionally to ask Maya questions about her childhood, her family, her musical background. Margaret had called her husband over and was whispering excitedly in his ear. Other people were taking pictures and making phone calls, though Maya wasn't sure why. Maya, Elena said, looking up from her phone, I need to ask you something important. Would you be willing to let me write about this? About what happened here tonight? Maya felt panic rising in her chest. Write about it? Why would anyone want to read about that? Because, Elena said, her voice full of conviction, this is the kind of story that reminds people why music matters. This is about talent and perseverance and the power of dreams that refuse to die, even when life forces us to bury them for a while. Maya looked around at all these faces staring at her with such intensity and hope. She thought about her small apartment, her 2 jobs, her quiet life that nobody paid attention to. The idea of being written about in a newspaper, of having strangers read about her personal struggles, terrified her. But then she thought about that 16-year-old girl who had to say goodbye to her piano all those years ago. Maybe it was time for that girl to finally have her voice heard. Maya agreed to let Elena write the story, though she had no idea what she was getting herself into. She thought maybe it would be a small article buried somewhere in the back pages of the newspaper, something that a few classical music fans might read over their morning coffee. She certainly didn't expect what happened next. Elena worked through the night, crafting an article that captured not just the facts of what had happened, but the emotion and magic of that moment in the concert hall. She wrote about Maya's childhood dreams, her family's struggles, and the 18 years of silence that had followed. But most importantly, she wrote about the music itself, how it had moved everyone in that room to tears, how it had reminded them of the power that art has to transform lives. The article was published online at 6 in the morning, just as Maya was getting ready for her shift at the diner. She had completely forgotten about it until her phone started buzzing with notifications. At first, she thought something was wrong with her phone. The notifications kept coming, one after another, until she finally opened her social media apps to see what was happening. The article had been shared hundreds of times already, and it wasn't even 7 in the morning yet. People were commenting, sharing their own stories about hidden talents and lost dreams. Someone had managed to get a recording of part of Maya's performance from that night, and it was spreading across the internet like wildfire. Maya sat on her small couch in her tiny apartment, staring at her phone in complete shock. She had lived her entire adult life trying to be invisible, trying not to draw attention to herself or cause any trouble. Now, suddenly, thousands of strangers were reading about her most personal moments and listening to her music. Her phone rang, making her jump. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered it anyway. "Is this Maya Rodriguez?" asked a professional-sounding woman's voice. "Yes," Maya said hesitantly. "My name is Jennifer Kim, and I'm a talent agent here in the city. I just read Elena Vasquez's article about you, and I have to say I'm absolutely fascinated. Would you be available to meet with me sometime this week?" Maya nearly dropped the phone. A talent agent wanted to meet with her? "I think there might be some mistake," she said. "I'm not a professional musician. I just work at a diner and clean buildings at night." "Ms. Rodriguez," Jennifer said patiently, "I've been in this business for 15 years, and I know talent when I see it. What happened last night at the Riverside Concert Hall is exactly the kind of story that changes lives. Would you at least consider meeting with me?" Before Maya could answer, her phone beeped with another incoming call. Then another. Her landlord was calling to tell her that reporters were gathering outside her apartment building. Her supervisor from the diner called to say that customers were coming in asking about her. Even her neighbor knocked on her door to tell her that someone from a TV station had been asking questions about her in the lobby. Maya felt like she was trapped in some kind of strange dream. Just 12 hours ago, she had been invisible. Now, it seemed like the whole world wanted to know about her. She didn't answer any more phone calls that morning. Instead, she sat in her apartment with the curtains closed, trying to process what was happening to her life, but the calls kept coming. Recording studios wanted to offer her contracts. Concert halls were inviting her to perform. Music schools were offering her scholarships to finish her education. A famous pianist from Europe sent a message saying he wanted to collaborate with her. Someone from a major television network wanted to interview her for a documentary about hidden talent in America. Elena called around noon to check on her. "Maya, how are you holding up?" "I know this must be overwhelming." "I don't understand what's happening," Maya said honestly. "Why are all these people calling me?" "I played piano for 10 minutes, that's all." "That's not all, and you know it," Elena said gently. "What you did last night was extraordinary. You reminded everyone in that room why music matters, why art matters. In a world full of manufactured entertainment and artificial everything, you gave people something real and authentic and beautiful." Maya looked out her window at the small crowd of reporters that had gathered on the sidewalk below. "But I'm not ready for this. I don't know how to be famous. I don't even know if I want to be famous." "You don't have to decide anything right now," Elena assured her. "But Maya, please don't let fear keep you from exploring what might be possible. You've already sacrificed 18 years of your musical life for other people. Maybe it's time to think about what you want for yourself." That afternoon, Maya made a decision that surprised even her. She called Jennifer Kim, the talent agent, and agreed to meet with her. Not because she was ready to become a professional musician, but because Elena was right about one thing. She had spent so many years putting everyone else's needs first that she had forgotten how to even think about her own dreams. The meeting was scheduled for the next day at a fancy office building downtown. Maya had never been in a place like that before, all glass and marble and expensive furniture. Jennifer turned out to be a small woman in her 40s with kind eyes and an energy that filled the entire room. Maya, Jennifer said as they sat down in her office, I want you to know that I don't usually chase after people like this. But what I heard in that recording, what I read in Elena's article, you have something that can't be taught or manufactured. You have a gift that the world needs to hear. But I'm not trained, Maya protested. I don't know anything about the music business or performing professionally or any of that. Those are all things that can be learned, Jennifer said. What you have, that ability to move people's souls with your music, that's something you're born with. And from what I understand, you've had that gift since you were a child. Jennifer pulled out a folder thick with papers. I've been making calls all morning. The Lincoln Center wants to offer you a debut recital. The Metropolitan Opera House has a spot available in their Emerging Artists series. 3 different record labels want to meet with you. And that's just the beginning. Maya felt dizzy looking at all those official-looking documents. I can't do any of this. I work at a diner. I clean buildings. I don't know how to be the kind of person who performs at Lincoln Center. Maya, Jennifer said, leaning forward in her chair, can I tell you something? The most successful artists I know aren't the ones who had everything handed to them. They're the ones who had to fight for their dreams, who understand what it means to struggle, who have something real to say through their art. You've lived a life that most classical musicians can't even imagine. That experience, that authenticity, it comes through in your music. Just then, Jennifer's assistant knocked on the door. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's someone here who insists on meeting Ms. Rodriguez. He says he's a pianist, and he was there last night. Maya's heart sank. It was probably David coming to tell everyone that she wasn't as good as they thought she was, that she didn't belong in their world, but when the door opened, it wasn't David who walked in. It was an elderly man with white hair and gentle eyes. Someone Maya didn't recognize, but who looked somehow familiar. Ms. Rodriguez, he said in a soft voice with just a trace of an accent, my name is Antonio Benedetti. I was in the audience last night, though I don't think you noticed me. I was sitting in the back and I heard every note you played. Maya's eyes went wide. She knew that name. Antonio Benedetti was one of the most respected piano teachers in the world. He had taught at the most prestigious conservatories, and his students had won every major competition and performed with every major orchestra. Professor Benedetti, Jennifer said, clearly as surprised as Maya, what brings you here? The old man smiled and looked directly at Maya. I came to offer this young woman something that money can't buy. I came to offer her my guidance, my teaching, and my belief in her extraordinary talent. Maya felt like the room was spinning. This was all happening too fast, and she wasn't sure she could handle any more surprises. I know this is overwhelming, Professor Benedetti said, as if reading her thoughts. But Maya, I have been teaching piano for over 50 years, and I have heard thousands of students play. What you did last night, that was not just talent. That was artistry of the highest order, performed by someone who truly understands what music is meant to be. He sat down across from her, his eyes kind but serious. I would like to work with you, to help you rediscover everything you once knew and learn everything you never had the chance to learn. But only if that's what you want. Only if you're ready to believe in yourself the way the rest of us already believe in you. Maya sat in Professor Benedetti's beautiful studio apartment, surrounded by 3 grand pianos and walls lined with photographs of famous musicians. It had been 2 weeks since that life-changing night at the concert hall, and she was still trying to wrap her head around everything that had happened. The elderly professor had insisted on starting her lessons immediately, saying that her natural talent was too precious to waste another day. Your technique is remarkable for someone who hasn't played in 18 years, Professor Benedetti said as Maya finished working through a Chopin etude. But there are small things we can improve, little details that will make your playing even more expressive. Maya nodded, wiping her hands on a towel. Her fingers were sore from practicing 4 hours a day, but it was a good kind of soreness. It reminded her that she was really doing this, really pursuing music again after all these years. Still, some days she felt like she was living someone else's life. The phone calls hadn't stopped. Jennifer Kim called every morning with new opportunities. Recording studios wanted to schedule sessions. Concert venues were offering dates 6 months in advance. A documentary crew wanted to follow Maya around and film her journey back to music. It was all exciting and terrifying at the same time. "I have something to tell you," Professor Benedetti said, settling into his favorite chair by the window. "Carnegie Hall has made a formal offer. They want you to perform a solo recital in their main hall. It would be in 6 months, which would give us time to prepare a full program." Maya's hands froze over the piano keys. Carnegie Hall, the most famous concert venue in America, maybe in the world. She had dreamed of playing there when she was a teenager, but it had seemed as impossible as flying to the moon. "I don't know if I'm ready for something like that," Maya said quietly. 6 months isn't very long to prepare for Carnegie Hall?" "Maya," the professor said gently, "you were ready for Carnegie Hall when you were 16 years old. You just didn't know it yet. These 6 months aren't about learning how to play, they're about learning how to believe in yourself." That afternoon, Maya went back to her apartment to find her parents waiting outside her building. She hadn't seen them since the newspaper article came out, though they had called several times. Her mother, Rosa, was a small woman with graying hair and worried eyes. Her father, Carlos, was a big man with rough hands who had worked construction his whole life. "Mia," her mother said, hugging Naya tightly, "we saw the article. We saw the videos online. Everyone in the neighborhood is talking about you." Maya felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. She had been dreading this conversation with her parents. They had sacrificed so much when she was younger, and she had never wanted them to feel guilty about the choices they had to make. "Mom, Dad, please don't feel bad about what happened when I was 16, Maya said as they went up to her apartment. "You did what you had to do. The family was more important than my piano lessons." Her father sat heavily on Maya's small couch, his eyes filling with tears. Carlos Rodriguez was not a man who cried easily, but seeing his daughter's face brought back 18 years of regret and worry. "Maya, we never forgave ourselves for making you give up music," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Your mother and we used to lie awake at night wondering what you could have become if we hadn't been so poor." Rosa reached into her purse and pulled out an old photograph. It showed Maya at age 15, sitting at their family piano in a white dress, holding a first-place trophy from a regional competition. She looked so young and confident and full of dreams. "We kept this picture all these years," Rosa said. "Sometimes we would look at it and wonder if we destroyed your future because we couldn't afford to keep your piano." Maya felt tears running down her cheeks. "You didn't destroy anything. You kept our family together. That was more important than any piano." "But look what happened when you finally got to play again," Carlos said. "Look how the whole world responded. Maybe if we had found another way." "Dad, stop," Maya said firmly. "You can't think like that. Besides, maybe everything happened exactly the way it was supposed to happen. Maybe I needed those 18 years of life experience to become the musician I am now." Over the next few weeks, Maya threw herself into preparing for her Carnegie Hall debut. She worked with Professor Benedetti every day, refining her technique and building a repertoire. She practiced scales until her fingers moved without conscious thought. She studied recordings of great pianists, learning how they interpreted the masters, but the most challenging part wasn't the music. It was learning how to handle the attention. Reporters wanted interviews. Photography magazines wanted to do photo shoots. Someone even offered her a deal to write a book about her experience. Maya, who had spent years trying to be invisible, was still adjusting to being the center of so much focus. Jennifer Kim helped her navigate the business side of her new career. They set up interviews with carefully chosen journalists, turned down offers that didn't feel right, and slowly built Maya's public image. The story that emerged was one of talent and perseverance, of dreams deferred but not destroyed. The key, Jennifer explained, is to stay true to who you are. People connect with your story because it's authentic. Don't try to become someone else just because you're famous now. 3 months before the Carnegie Hall concert, something unexpected happened. David, the pianist who had challenged Maya that night at the Riverside Concert Hall, reached out through Jennifer's office. He wanted to meet with Maya personally. They arranged to meet at a quiet coffee shop downtown. David looked different than he had that night, less arrogant, more humble. The events of that evening had clearly affected him deeply. "Maya," he said as they sat down with their coffee, "I've been thinking about that night for months. I keep replaying it in my head and I feel worse about my behavior every time." "You already apologized," Maya said. "You don't need to keep beating yourself up about it." "But I do," David insisted, "because I realized something that night. I realized that I had forgotten why I started playing music in the first place. I had gotten so caught up in technique and credentials and impressing people that I had lost touch with the emotion, the heart of music." He paused, staring into his coffee cup. "When you played that night, you reminded me what music is supposed to be. It's supposed to move people, to tell stories, to connect hearts. I had turned it into a performance, a way to show off. You showed me what it means to really communicate through music." David reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope. "I want to do something for you. Something that might help make up for how I treated you." Inside the envelope was a check for $50,000, made out to Maya Rodriguez. Maya stared at the check in shock. "David, I can't accept this. This is too much." "It's not too much," David said. "It's what I made from my last 3 concerts. Combined. And those concerts happened because I've had every advantage in the world, expensive teachers, the best schools, family connections in the music industry. You achieved more in 10 minutes of playing than I had achieved in 20 years of professional performances. But—" "Please," David interrupted, "let me do this. Use it for whatever you need. Better instruments, more lessons with Professor Benedetti, a new dress for Carnegie Hall, or just use it to pay your rent, so you can focus on music instead of working 2 jobs. Maya looked at the check again, thinking about her tiny apartment, her job at the diner, the cleaning supplies in her closet. This money could change everything for her. It could give her the freedom to focus entirely on music for the first time in her adult life. "There's one condition," David said. "I want to be in the audience at Carnegie Hall. I want to hear what you can do when you're really prepared, when you've had time to work with the best teacher in the world." Maya folded the check carefully and put it in her purse. "Thank you," she said simply. "This means more than you know." As she walked home that afternoon, Maya realized that she was no longer the same person who had been mopping floors just a few months ago. She was becoming someone new, someone who was learning to accept help and believe in her own worth. The girl who had given up her dreams at 16 was finally growing into the woman who could make those dreams come true. The day of Maya's Carnegie Hall debut arrived with a crisp autumn breeze and golden sunlight streaming through her apartment windows. She woke up early not because she had set an alarm, but because her body was too excited and nervous to sleep any longer. Tonight, she would walk onto one of the most famous stages in the world and perform for an audience of over 2,000 people. Maya sat on the edge of her bed, looking at the elegant black dress hanging in her closet. Jennifer had helped her choose it, simple but sophisticated, the kind of dress that would photograph beautifully under the stage lights. Next to it hung a small silver necklace that had belonged to her grandmother, the same grandmother whose piano had started Maya's musical journey all those years ago. Her phone was buzzing with messages from well-wishers. Professor Benedetti had sent a long text full of encouragement and final reminders about breathing and posture. Elena, the music critic who had started this whole journey with her article, had texted to say she would be in the front row. Even her old supervisor from the diner had sent a message saying that everyone there was proud of her and would be watching the live stream. Maya's parents had driven up from their hometown the day before and were staying in a hotel room that Jennifer had arranged for them. They had never been to New York City before, and Maya could tell they were both excited and overwhelmed by the big city. Her father had spent an hour just staring up at the tall buildings, shaking his head in amazement. "I can't believe our little girl is going to play at Carnegie Hall," he had said over dinner the night before. "When you were 5 years old, picking out songs on your grandmother's piano, I never imagined something like this was possible." Now, as Maya got ready for the biggest night of her life, she thought about that 5-year-old girl. She thought about all the years of practice, the competitions, the dreams of being a concert pianist. She thought about the devastating day when they sold the piano and the 18 years of silence that followed. Most of all, she thought about that night at the Riverside Concert Hall when David had challenged her to play, never knowing that he was about to change her life forever. By mid-afternoon, Maya was at Carnegie Hall for her final rehearsal. The venue was even more beautiful than she had imagined. The main hall was enormous, with rows upon rows of red velvet seats rising up toward an ornate ceiling. The stage looked huge from the artist's entrance, and the piano, a magnificent Steinway, grand, sat in the center like a sleeping giant waiting to be awakened. "How are you feeling?" asked Jennifer, who had been by Maya's side all day, handling last-minute details and making sure everything was perfect. "Nervous," Maya admitted, "but also excited. I keep thinking about all the great musicians who have played on this stage. Rubinstein, Horowitz, Van Cliburn. It's hard to believe I belong here with them." "You absolutely belong here," said a familiar voice behind her. Maya turned to see Professor Benedetti walking toward them, carrying a small gift box wrapped in silver paper. "Professor, you didn't have to get me anything," Maya said. "This isn't from me," he said with a mysterious smile. "This arrived at my studio this morning with a note saying it should be given to you before your performance." Maya opened the box carefully and gasped when she saw what was inside. It was a small silver pin in the shape of a piano, delicate and beautiful. The note inside read, "For Maya, may your music continue to remind us all why we fell in love with piano in the first place. Break a leg tonight." Maya felt tears forming in her eyes. 6 months ago, David had been her biggest critic. Now he was one of her strongest supporters. It was a reminder of how much had changed, not just in her own life, but in the lives of everyone who had been touched by her music that night. As evening approached, Maya went to her dressing room to prepare. She had learned to apply stage makeup and style her hair professionally, skills she never thought she would need. As she looked at herself in the mirror, she barely recognized the confident woman staring back at her. Gone was the tired janitor, with rough hands and simple clothes. In her place was an artist, someone who belonged on this stage. There was a knock on her dressing room door. "Maya, it's time," called Jennifer. Maya took one last look in the mirror, pinned David's piano pin to her dress, and walked toward the stage. As she moved through the corridors of Carnegie Hall, she could hear the murmur of conversation from the audience. The hall was completely sold out, with people who had traveled from all over the country to hear her play, standing in the wings. Maya could see a small section of the audience. Her parents were in the third row, looking proud and nervous. Elena was in the front row with her notebook, ready to write about this historic moment. And there, near the back, she spotted David, who had kept his promise to be there for her triumph. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the voice of the announcer, "please welcome Maya Rodriguez." Maya walked onto the stage, and the applause that greeted her was thunderous. 2,000 people were on their feet, clapping for the woman who had gone from cleaning floors to headlining Carnegie Hall in just 6 months. Maya stood at the piano bench for a moment, looking out at the sea of faces. Feeling overwhelmed by their support and enthusiasm, she sat down at the piano and adjusted the bench, just as she had done that night at the Riverside Concert Hall. But this time was different. This time she wasn't playing to prove a point or defend herself. This time she was playing because this was who she was meant to be. Maya began with the same piece that had started her journey back to music, Chopin's Nocturne in E-flat major. But her interpretation now was richer, deeper, informed by months of study with Professor Benedetti and years of life experience that had taught her about loss and hope and redemption. As she played, Maya felt the same magic she had experienced that first night. The music flowed through her fingers and filled the enormous hall, reaching every person in the audience and touching their hearts. She played Beethoven with power and passion, Debussy with delicate beauty, and Rachmaninoff with the kind of emotional depth that comes only from someone who has truly struggled and emerged stronger. For her final piece, Maya played the improvisation she had been working on with Professor Benedetti. It was based on a simple melody her grandmother used to hum while cooking, but Maya had developed it into a complex, beautiful composition that told the story of her entire journey. It spoke of childhood dreams and heartbreaking loss, of 18 years of silence and the courage to try again, of the power of music to heal and transform and inspire. When the last note faded into silence, the audience erupted in the kind of applause that performers dream of receiving. People were on their feet, some crying, others shouting, "Bravo!" The ovation went on for nearly 10 minutes, with Maya returning to the stage again and again to acknowledge the crowd's appreciation. Later, at the reception after the concert, Maya was surrounded by people who wanted to congratulate her and share how her music had affected them. Record label executives were making offers, concert promoters were discussing future bookings, and music lovers were simply thanking her for reminding them why they loved classical music. But the moment that meant the most to Maya came when her parents finally made their way through the crowd to reach her. Her mother was crying, and her father's eyes were bright with tears he was trying not to shed. "Mia," her mother whispered, hugging her tightly, "you were magnificent. Your grandmother would have been so proud." "We're sorry it took so long," her father said, his voice thick with emotion. "We're sorry you had to wait 18 years to get back to where you belonged." "Dad," Maya said, taking his rough, working man's hands in hers, "I'm not sorry about anything. Every single thing that happened led me to this moment. I needed those 18 years to become the person who could play music like this." As the evening wound down and the crowd began to thin, Maya found herself standing alone on the now empty Carnegie Hall stage. The lights were dimmed and the audience had gone home, but she could still feel the energy of what had just happened. Elena approached her, notebook in hand. "So, Maya, how does it feel to know that your life has completely changed?" Maya looked out at the empty seats, thinking about the journey that had brought her here. From a 5-year-old girl picking out melodies on her grandmother's piano, to a teenager forced to give up her dreams, to a janitor mopping floors and hiding her talent, to finally becoming the artist she was always meant to be. It feels like coming home, Maya said simply. It feels like I finally remembered who I was supposed to be all along. 6 months later, Maya was performing with orchestras around the world, but she never forgot the lessons she had learned during her years of struggle. She started a foundation to help young musicians from low-income families continue their education, ensuring that financial hardship would never again force a talented young person to give up their dreams, the way she had been forced to do. And sometimes, late at night after a performance, Maya would think about that moment when David had challenged her to play, never knowing that his cruel joke would become the catalyst for one of the most remarkable comebacks in classical music history. Dreams, Maya had learned, never really die. Sometimes they just wait patiently for the right moment to be reborn.